Hello, everybody. David Schuster here. Donald Trump's top economic advisor now says the administration's tariff refund plan is a mess. Kevin Hassett appeared on CBS News and addressed Trump efforts to send every American a $2,000 check. That effort would become especially challenging if the U.S. Supreme Court rules the tariffs are unconstitutional and that the Trump administration has to refund tariff revenue to businesses and producers.
The people who pay the tariff, if there is a refund, the people who actually paid for the good, the importer in most cases, they're the ones who'd be the first line of defense for refunding the tariff. But I really don't think that's going to happen. It'd be very complicated. And then that person would be responsible for allocating the tariff refund to the appropriate folks.
That sounds like a mess.
Yes, it is a mess. And that's why I think the Supreme Court wouldn't do it.
The Supreme Court would not do it, says Hassett, except the Supreme Court doesn't make rulings based on whether the outcome would be difficult for an administration. The question before the court is whether the Trump tariffs are constitutional. Donald Trump imposed tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. During a lengthy argument at the court in November, most of the justices seemed skeptical that Trump has tariff authority under the act. And if the court rules against the Trump administration, the government might have to reimburse the tariff money it has collected, or around $250 billion. The court could conceivably rule against the administration and say the tariffs must be stopped going forward, thereby saving the administration from a complicated reimbursement process. Still, any adverse ruling would kill Donald Trump's already complicated plan to have the Treasury send every American $2,000 checks. However, the Trump administration continues to embrace the idea of tariff dividend checks, even if officials cannot explain to reporters how this would work or when.
Trump has talked about sending out $2,000 checks to U.S. citizens. Earlier this year, he also talked about sending a Doge dividend. That didn't materialize. Should U.S. Citizens expect the $2,000 proposal? Is the White House committed to making that happen?
The White House is committed to making that happen, yes, and we are currently exploring all legal options to get that done. I don't have a timeline for you or any further details, but I can confirm for you that the president made it clear he wants to make it happen, and so his team of economic advisors are looking into it, and when we have an update, we'll provide one.
Let me tell you about the latest completely insane plan coming out of the Trump administration and how even Trump's own economic advisors are now publicly admitting it's a disaster. We're talking about these tariff dividend checks that Trump keeps promising, these magical $2,000 payments that are supposed to appear in every American's mailbox like some kind of economic fairy tale. And now Kevin Hassett, Trump's top economic advisor, went on CBS News and, when pressed about the details, essentially admitted the whole thing is a mess that probably can't work. The context here is important because it shows you how Trump operates. Make big promises that sound great, get people excited about free money, then let the details fall apart while moving on to the next shiny distraction. Trump has been talking for months about sending every American a $2,000 check funded by tariff revenue. The idea is that his tariffs on foreign goods are bringing in so much money that the government can just distribute it directly to citizens. Sounds great, right? Free money from tariffs that foreigners are supposedly paying, except every single part of that is either a lie or impossible to implement. Hassett appeared on CBS and was asked about what happens if the Supreme Court rules that Trump's tariffs are unconstitutional and the administration has to refund all that tariff revenue to the businesses and producers who actually paid it. Because here's what Trump never tells people. Americans pay the tariffs, not foreign countries. When Trump imposes a tariff on imported goods, the American company importing those goods pays the tariff to the U.S. government, then passes that cost along to consumers through higher prices. So tariffs are effectively a tax on American businesses and consumers, not on China or Mexico or wherever the goods are coming from. Hassett's response to the question about refunds was revealing. He said if there is a refund, the people who actually paid for the goods, the importers in most cases, would be first in line. But then that importer would be responsible for allocating the tariff refund to the appropriate folks, meaning figuring out how much of the increased cost was passed to consumers versus absorbed by the company. The CBS host responded perfectly, "That sounds like a mess." And Hassett agreed, "Yes, it is a mess. And that's why I think the Supreme Court wouldn't do it." Think about that logic for a second. Hassett is arguing that the Supreme Court won't rule Trump's tariffs unconstitutional because it would be too complicated to fix the damage. That's not how the Supreme Court works. They don't make constitutional rulings based on whether the outcome would be administratively inconvenient for the president. Their job is to determine whether Trump had legal authority to impose these tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which he claimed gave him the power to do this without congressional approval. During oral arguments at the court back in November, most of the justices seemed skeptical that Trump has tariff authority under that act. The law was designed for genuine national security emergencies, not for the president to impose whatever trade policies he wants by declaring everything an emergency. If the court rules against the Trump administration, the government might have to reimburse the tariff money it's collected, which is around $250 billion. That's $250 billion that would have to be refunded to businesses. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. Now, the court could conceivably rule against the administration, but say the tariffs just have to stop going forward without requiring reimbursement for past collections. That would save Trump from the complicated refund process. But either way, any adverse ruling would completely kill Trump's already ridiculous plan to send everyone $2,000 checks. Because if the tariffs are unconstitutional, that revenue doesn't exist anymore. And if they have to refund what's already been collected, they're in the hole by hundreds of billions of dollars. But the Trump administration continues to embrace this fantasy. The White House press secretary was asked directly whether citizens should expect these $2,000 checks, whether the White House is committed to making it happen. And she said, yes, the White House is committed. They're exploring all legal options. The president wants it to happen. His economic advisors are looking into it. But she couldn't provide a timeline or any details about how it would actually work. Translation: we're waiting on the Supreme Court, and even if they rule in our favor, we still have no idea how to actually do this. Which shouldn't surprise anyone, because Trump says a lot of things that are completely impossible. Take his recent statements about prescription drug prices. He claimed he's bringing down drug prices by thousands of percent, specifically mentioning reductions of 1,000%, 1,200%, 1,300%, 1,400% in some cases. Let me explain why this is mathematically insane in a way that even Trump should be able to understand, though clearly he doesn't. If the cost of anything is reduced by 100%, that product becomes free. That's basic math. Zero cost. So if a pill normally costs $10 and you reduce the price by 100%, it's free. A reduction of 1,000% on a $10 pill means the pharmacy would pay the customer $90 to take the pill. A 1,400% reduction on a $10 drug means the pharmacy would pay the consumer $130 to take it. Is Trump actually saying that drug companies and pharmacies are going to start paying us to take prescription medications? Of course not. But this is what happens when you have a president who either doesn't know basic math or whose brain has turned to complete mush. He throws out numbers that sound impressive without any understanding of what they actually mean. And his supporters hear 1,400% reduction and think, wow, he's really doing something about drug prices, without stopping to realize that what he's describing is literally impossible. Back to these tariff dividend checks that Trump keeps promising. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has suggested the money could take different forms, like tax breaks or rebates. But Trump keeps undercutting Bessent and insisting he wants actual checks sent out, $2,000 to every American making less than $100,000 a year. That's about 150 million American adults. Do the math on that. 150 million people times $2,000 per person equals $300 billion. The government has collected about $250 billion in tariff revenue. So even if they kept every penny of that tariff money, which they can't because they have to run the government, they'd still be $50 billion short. And that's before you account for the fact that tariffs are supposed to fund government operations, not be distributed as cash payments. Where's the other $50 billion going to come from? And how do you replace the $250 billion in ongoing revenue that would be needed to actually run the federal government? This is also not the first time Trump has promised magical checks that never materialized. Remember when Elon Musk was supposedly running the Department of Government Efficiency, firing federal workers left and right, and Trump said all the money they were saving would be given back to Americans? That never happened. The only thing that happened was massive disruption to government services and thousands of people losing their jobs, but no checks appeared in anyone's mailbox. So in short, don't run out and spend $2,000 on your credit card thinking you're getting reimbursed by the government, because it's not happening. Trump likes to say things that are pie in the sky, delusional, and completely defy basic math. Even if the Supreme Court upholds his tariffs and lets the Treasury keep the $250 billion in revenue collected so far, would Congress actually approve sending all of that money, plus another $50 billion to 150 million Americans? Lawmakers on Capitol Hill say the votes aren't there. The more likely scenario, if anything happens at all, would be tax rebates spread over multiple years. That's Scott Bessent's idea, which actually makes some fiscal sense. But Trump keeps shooting it down because tax rebates don't have the same political impact as big checks with his name on them arriving in the mail before an election. Trump wants the visual of Americans opening envelopes and seeing $2,000 checks that he can take credit for. Reality and math be damned. And if the Supreme Court doesn't rule in the administration's favor on tariffs, we're back to that mess Kevin Hassett acknowledged. He was asked directly, if the Supreme Court doesn't find in your favor, who gets the refund, the companies or the consumers? And Hassett basically said, we really expect the court to rule with us, but if they don't, it's unlikely they'd call for widespread refunds because it would be an administrative nightmare. He said whoever actually paid the tariff, whoever cut the check to buy the goods, would be the person getting the refund if there were one. But who would that be exactly? The Trump administration can't say because it would depend on every single tariff transaction. Some importers absorbed costs. Some passed them entirely to consumers. Some split the difference. Figuring out who should get refunded what amount across billions of transactions would be virtually impossible. That's the mess Hassett is talking about. And his hope is that the Supreme Court will look at that mess and decide to let Trump keep the money to avoid the administrative headache, which again is not how constitutional law works, but is apparently how this administration thinks it should work. The bottom line is that Trump's entire tariff strategy, which has already caused the U.S. economy to sputter and inflation to spike, is also a potential financial nightmare for the administration if the Supreme Court rules against him. We're talking about possibly having to refund $250 billion while also dealing with the economic damage the tariffs have already caused. Consumer prices have gone up, supply chains have been disrupted, American businesses that rely on imported components are struggling. Jobs are being lost, and all of this for tariffs that might not even be constitutional. Against this backdrop, Trump keeps talking about magical $2,000 checks appearing for everyone. He describes pharmaceutical negotiations where companies will apparently pay us to take their drugs. He throws out percentage reductions that are mathematically impossible. And his supporters eat it up because it sounds good, because they want to believe the president can just make free money appear through sheer force of will and brilliant deal-making. Who needs reality when we have Trump and his delusions? Who needs math or constitutional law or basic economic literacy when you can just promise whatever sounds good and worry about the details? Never. This is governing by fantasy, and we're all living in the consequences of that fantasy crashing into reality. Even Fox Business News, which normally acts as state media for Trump, recently admitted that his policies are sinking the U.S. labor market, with unemployment hitting 4.6%, the highest since September 2021, and massive job losses in recent months. But Trump will keep promising those checks. His advisors will keep going on television, unable to explain how any of it would work. The Supreme Court will eventually rule on whether the tariffs are constitutional. And through it all, Americans struggling with higher prices and economic uncertainty will keep waiting for relief that's never coming, for $2,000 checks that exist only in Trump's imagination and his campaign promises. That's the state of economic policy in this administration, a mess that even Trump's own advisors now publicly acknowledge, but that Trump himself refuses to abandon, because admitting it doesn't work would require acknowledging reality, and that's never been his strong suit.